It was April the 8th, 1943, 27,000 feet above Caen, France. Oberleutnant Rolf Hermischen, a veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 26, looked through the crystal-clear canopy of his Fokker-Wulf 190. Below him, he saw the new American fighters struggling for altitude. And he started laughing. Behind his oxygen mask, he couldn't suppress the smirk. He keyed his radio and transmitted a line that would become infamous in the Luftwaffe mess halls. "The Yankees have sent us flying milk bottles!" To the German elite, accustomed to sleek Spitfires and nimble Soviet Yuks, the American machine looked like a joke. It was the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. It was a barrel-shaped 7-ton monster. It was powered by a massive Pratt Whitney R-2800 double Wasp engine that looked too big for the airframe. To the Germans, it looked like a fat, clumsy target. Hermischen circled like a wolf, preparing to slaughter the 4th Fighter Group novices. But what Hermischen didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that they weren't looking at a dogfighter. They were looking at an executioner. Hidden inside those massive wings was a mathematics of destruction the Germans couldn't comprehend. 8 .5 caliber Browning machine guns, 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a combined rate of fire of 6,000 rounds per minute. Hermischen was laughing at a machine that could saw a Messerschmitt in half in less than 2 seconds. The laughter was about to die. Within 18 months, the flying milk bottle would transform from a joke into the most feared sound in the European sky. This isn't a story about a fair fight. This is the story of how American industrial brutality crushed the Luftwaffe into the dirt. A fighter plane in 1943 was supposed to be a scalpel. The Spitfire weighed 5,000 pounds, the Messerschmitt 109 6,000. They were light, agile, and fragile. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was a sledgehammer. It was born from panic. In June 1940, as Nazi Germany swept across France, the U.S. Army Air Corps sent an urgent demand to Republic Aviation's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli: build us something that can dominate the stratosphere. Kartveli realized he couldn't build a normal plane. He had to build a monster. He reportedly told his design team, "It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." When the prototype, the XP-47B, first flew on May 6, 1941, it shocked the test pilots. It weighed 9,900 pounds empty, nearly double the weight of a Spitfire. It stood 14 feet tall. The reason for this obesity wasn't the armor or the guns. It was the lungs. To fight at 30,000 feet, an engine needs to breathe. Kartveli built the entire fuselage around a massive, complex turbo-supercharger system. The ducting ran from the engine to the nose, under the cockpit, to the turbine in the tail, and back again. It was an engineering marvel, but it made the plane huge. And initially, it was a death trap. When the 56th Fighter Group, the first unit to fly them, began training under Colonel Hub Zemke, the Jug tried to kill them. The engine produced so much torque that if a pilot throttled up too fast on takeoff, the plane would torque roll, flipping upside down and slamming into the runway before it even left the ground. In the air, it was worse. Pilots discovered a terrifying phenomenon called compressibility. Because the P-47 was so heavy, it dove faster than any other plane in history. But as it approached the speed of sound, shock waves formed on the wings. The control surfaces froze. The stick turned to stone. The pilot would pull with all his strength, but the plane would keep diving straight to the ground. Between September 1942 and January 1943, the 56th lost 18 pilots and 47 aircraft in training accidents. The P-47 killed more Americans in training than the Germans would in the first 2 months of combat. But those who survived felt a raw, brutal power. Lieutenant Robert Johnson described his first flight. "It was like strapping yourself into a locomotive. The power was unbelievable." Kartveli hadn't built a plane to dance. He had built a plane to dive. From 30,000 feet, the P-47 wasn't a brick. It was a meteorite. The German laughter continued through the spring of 1943. Luftwaffe pilots developed tactics to exploit the P-47's weaknesses. Always force a turning fight and never engage above 25,000 feet. The American fighter was meat for the slaughter. Then, on June 26, 1943, over Lazou, France, the laws of air combat were permanently suspended. It involved Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 61st Fighter Squadron. Johnson's formation of 48 P-47s was ambushed by 16 Focke-Wulf 190s from Jagdgeschwader 26, led by the elite Wilhelm Ferdinand Galland. The ambush was perfect. Diving from the sun, the Germans poured concentrated fire into the rear of the formation. Johnson's Thunderbolt was caught in a crossfire. It absorbed catastrophic damage in the first seconds of combat. 21 times 20mm cannon shells exploded across the aircraft. The canopy shattered, and the hydraulic fluid sprayed the cockpit. Fire erupted behind the instrument panel. Johnson, wounded in the nose and leg, tried to bail out. He couldn't. A 20mm shell had detonated in the canopy track, welding it shut. He was trapped in a dying machine at 27,000 feet. What happened next defied the physics of combat. With damage that would have disintegrated a Messerschmitt, the P-47, true to its heavy engineering, somehow managed to level off and limp towards England. Then, a lone Focke-Wulf 190 discovered the crippled Thunderbolt, crawling towards the channel in less than 170 miles per hour. The German pilot, confident in an easy kill, positioned himself behind Johnson. He fired his remaining heavy weapons. The P-47 absorbed the entire cannon ammunition load, shrugging it off. The German returned, now only firing his machine guns. He emptied every last round into the wreck. The Thunderbolt continued to fly. The pilot pulled alongside the P-47, staring at the sheer volume of destruction. Johnson later recalled seeing the young German's expression shift from confidence to utter disbelief. Out of ammunition, the pilot simply shook his head, gave a stunned salute, and peeled away. Johnson crash-landed at Manston, England. The crew chief stopped counting bullet holes after reaching 200. Forensic analysis was terrifying. 3 of the 4 main longerons, the structural backbone of the fuselage, were shot through. The engine had multiple direct hits. The control cables were partially severed. the Thunderbolt had taken the equivalent of 2 full enemy attacks and survived. Johnson's flight was impossible. His aircraft, a machine the Germans called a pregnant cow, had proved itself unkillable. German intelligence receiving the combat report initially refused to believe it. The jokes stopped on June the 26th. The German pilots had just met their structural limit. The P-47 was a juggernaut, built not just to fight, but to survive obliteration. By July 1943, the Americans stopped trying to dogfight. Lieutenant Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, realized that trying to turn with a Fokker-Wulf was suicide. He looked at the physics of his dinosaur. It was heavy. It was aerodynamic. He issued a new order. Don't turn! Dive! The tactic was refined by Captain Walker Bud Mahurin. It was called boom and zoom, but the pilots called it the Thunderbolt turkey shoot. The physics were terrifying. From 30,000 feet, a P-47 could roll inverted and dive. Because of its massive 7-ton weight, it didn't just fall, it accelerated like a falling anvil. It could reach 550 miles per hour in a dive, faster than the speed of sound was thought to be possible at the time. No German piston fighter could catch it. If a Messerschmitt tried to follow a P-47 into that dive, its wings would rip off. The Americans would climb to the stratosphere, spot the Germans below, and drop on them. At the bottom of the dive, they would unleash the convergence zone. This was the Thunderbolt's signature. The 8.5 caliber guns were harmonized to intersect at exactly 300 yards. At that specific point, the stream of bullets created a zone of destruction, roughly 6 feet in diameter. Any aircraft caught in that tube didn't just take damage, it ceased to exist. The revelation came on August the 17th, 1943, during the dual raid on Schweinfurt and Regensburg. Major David Schilling, leading the 62nd Fighter Squadron, spotted a formation of German Messerschmitt Bf-110 destroyers, heavy, twin-engine fighters designed to kill bombers. Schilling's flight rolled over and dove from 28,000 feet. Unteroffizier Heinrich Roth, a German gunner who survived the attack, later described the horrors in an interrogation. He said, "The American fighters came down like hammers from heaven." Roth opened fire at 800 meters. He saw his bullet strike the P-47's wing. The Thunderbolt didn't even wobble. Then the American fired. Roth watched the Bf-110 in front of him simply come apart. "Not shut down," he said. "Destroyed." The wings separated from the fuselage. The tail was severed. The crew compartment was shredded into metal confetti. In less than 60 seconds, 8 German heavy fighters were erased from the sky. The Germans realized too late that the P-47 wasn't a dogfighter, it was an airborne executioner. And it was about to get even faster. By late 1943, the German pilots thought they had solved the riddle of the Thunderbolt. They knew its secret. It was a gravity fighter. It could dive faster than anything in the world, but it climbed like a tombstone. If a German pilot found himself with a P-47 on his tail, the procedure was simple. Pull back on the stick and climb. The heavy American machine, struggling against its own 7-ton mass, would stall out, leaving the Luftwaffe pilots safe in the upper air. It was a reliable escape route until January 1944. That winter, a new variant arrived in England, the P-47 D-22. Visually, it looked identical to the earlier models, but the nose mechanics had undergone a radical surgery. The old toothpick propeller was gone. In its place was the Hamilton Standard Hydromatic propeller. The pilots called them paddle blades. They were massive, 13 feet in diameter, with incredibly wide cords that didn't just slice the air, they shoveled it. They bit into the atmosphere like oars in water. The effect on performance was violent. The P-47's climb rate jumped from an anemic 2,200 feet per minute to over 3,000. The acceleration became explosive. The fat cow had learned to sprint uphill. The Luftwaffe found out the hard way. Hauptmann Heinz Knocker, a veteran of Jagdgeschwader 11 with over 200 combat missions, encountered the new monsters near Hanover in February 1944. He wrote in his combat diary with palpable horror, "The fat German fighters have learned to climb. We bounced a formation expecting our usual advantage. Instead, they turned into us. When we tried to disengage upwards, they followed us up at 30,000 feet. Schmidt was caught and blown apart. Nothing left but smoke and fragments." Knocker realized the tactical landscape had collapsed. "These are not the same machines we laughed at last year." But the propeller did more than change the climb rate. It changed the soundtrack of the war. When the massive 13-foot tips of the paddle blades reached rotational velocity, they broke the sound barrier. They created a continuous supersonic roar that was distinct from any other aircraft engine. German ground troops reported they could identify the P-47 by sound alone from 5 miles away. They stopped calling it a milk bottle. They gave it a new name: Donnerschlag, thunderclap. It was a deep, threatening rumble that vibrated in the chest. It meant that death was coming. By March 1944, the P-47s unleashed another surprise: endurance. Equipped with massive 108-gallon paper drop tanks under the wings and a 75-gallon tank under the belly, they could now fly over 1,000 miles. They could escort bombers all the way to Berlin. The German aces, who were used to fighting unescorted bombers, were suddenly facing fresh fighters deep in their own territory. Major Gunther Roll, the third highest scoring ace in history, with 275 confirmed kills, met the new reality on March 6, 1944. Flying over the Reich, his squadron spotted a flight of P-47s far below. Roll later recalled, "We saw them above us, fat silhouettes against the sun. Someone on the radio laughed and said, 'Here comes the flying pigs.'" 30 seconds later, the laughter stopped. The flying pigs dropped their tanks and climbed. They didn't stall. They came down on Roll's formation like an avalanche. "The first pass destroyed 3 of our fighters," Roll said. "Just gone. Transformed into burning debris. Their guns didn't fire in bursts like ours. They poured out solid streams of fire." Roll was shot down that day. He lost his thumb to a .5 caliber bullet. He survived, but he carried the lesson for the rest of his life. The American industrial machine had built a pig that could fly, and it was hungry. By spring 1944, the American war machine delivered the final insult to the Luftwaffe, the P-51 Mustang. The Mustang took the high-altitude escort job. That released the P-47 to do what it was actually built for, to get down to the mud, to kill everything that moved. The Germans called them Jabos, fighter bombers. It was a cute name for a terrifying reality. The P-47 wasn't a fighter anymore. It was flying artillery. Republic Aviation had turned the dinosaur into a weapons platform that defied gravity. They strapped two 1,000-pound bombs under the wings. They added a 500-pounder under the belly. Then they added the nightmare, 10 by 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs. These weren't fireworks. Each rocket hit with the force of a 105mm artillery shell, and the P-47 delivered them at 400 miles per hour with sniper precision. On June 6, 1944, the P-47s sealed the doom of the Third Reich. Over 500 Thunderbolts formed a steel roof over the Normandy beaches. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Fischer, one of the few German pilots to survive that morning, described the massacre to his superiors. He didn't talk about tactics. He talked about the sheer volume of metal. "The sky belonged to the Americans," he reported. "We tried to break through at dawn. I was the only one to return. Their guns turned our fighters into aluminium rain." With the sky cleared, the Thunderbolts looked down. They hunted the roads. They hunted the trains. The logistics behind this slaughter were staggering. Back in the U.S., the Lake City Arsenal in Missouri was running 24 hours a day, producing 30 million rounds per month, just to feed the P-47s. And these weren't standard bullets. They were delayed action incendiary rounds. American engineers designed the fuse to ignite after penetrating the thin aluminium skin of a truck or aircraft. They didn't explode on contact, they exploded inside the target. Oberst Hans von Luck, a panzer commander, watched his regiment disintegrate in seconds under this rain of advanced ordnance. "They came in low," he said, "so low you could see the pilots' faces. Then the hammer of those heavy machine guns. A column of our trucks simply ceased to exist. 20 vehicles transformed into burning wreckage in one pass." It wasn't combat, it was industrial harvesting. In June 1944 alone, the 9th Air Force Thunderbolts posted numbers that looked like accounting errors. 651 locomotives destroyed, 3,847 trucks burned, 512 tanks blown open, 4,553 horse-drawn wagons strafed. The Wehrmacht stopped moving by day. The greatest army in Europe was paralyzed, hiding in the forests, terrified of the sound of a double Wasp engine. The German pilots had laughed at the fat cow in 1943. By 1944, that fat cow was starving their army to death. It wasn't just a machine that was superior, it was the man inside it. By 1944, the United States wasn't just mass-producing aircraft, it was mass-producing experts. The U.S. Army Air Force training program was a factory of precision. Every P-47 pilot arriving in Europe had logged a minimum of 400 flight hours. They had 100 hours in advanced fighters before they ever saw a German. They practiced deflection shooting at towed targets. They practiced formation flying in zero visibility. They even practiced against captured German aircraft, understanding the enemy's turning radius better than the Germans did. Lieutenant Eugene Roberts, arriving in England in September 1944, later described the disparity. "My first mission, I knew exactly what to do. The German pilot I faced couldn't have had half my experience. It wasn't even a fair fight." He was right. While America graduated 30,000 pilots annually, the Luftwaffe was bleeding to death. Fuel shortages meant German cadets barely flew. By late 1944, the average German pilot entered combat with less than 100 hours total flight time. Some had as few as 30. They weren't pilots, they were targets. They were teenagers thrown into the cockpit of a complex Messerschmitt, told to save the fatherland, and then sent up against American veterans flying 7-ton armored monsters. The result was a massacre. The P-47 pilots didn't just outgun them, they outflew them, outthought them, and systematically erased the Luftwaffe's institutional memory. By late 1944, the P-47 should have been a relic. The Germans had introduced a weapon that belonged in science fiction, the Messerschmitt Me-262. It was the world's first operational jet fighter. It had no propeller. It flew on pillars of fire. It could reach 540 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour faster than any American piston engine. Against a propeller-driven P-47, it was like a Formula One car fighting a tractor. But the German pilots made a fatal mistake. They thought speed made them invincible. They forgot about gravity. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Mayer, commanding the 352nd Fighter Group, proved them wrong on November 27, 1944. He was patrolling at 28,000 feet where he spotted a silhouette below. It was moving impossibly fast. No prop blur, no engine smoke, just a shark-like shape cutting through the air. Mayer didn't run. He rolled his 7-ton Thunderbolt inverted and pulled the nose down. He let physics do the work. The P-47, heavy as an anvil, accelerated past 500 miles per hour. It screamed down from the stratosphere, the airframe vibrating violently as it approached the speed of sound. The German pilot never saw him. He was confident in his jet engines. He didn't check his 6 o'clock high because he believed nothing in the Allied infantry could catch him. Mayer closed the distance to 400 yards and unleashed the battery. The 8.5 cals hit the jet like a sledgehammer. The lightweight aluminium skin of the Me-262 shattered. Mayer's combat report was clinical. The enemy aircraft disintegrated. Large pieces, including both engines, separated from the fuselage. The pilot did not escape. The dinosaur had eaten the future. Republic Aviation realized the threat. They didn't build a jet. They just made the dinosaur angrier. They rolled out the P-47M. It was the ultimate hot rod. They stripped out the weight. They tuned the R-2800 engine to the breaking point. And then they added water-methanol injection. It was chemical violence. When the pilot hit the war emergency power switch, The engine dumped a mixture of water and alcohol into the cylinders. The engine roared. The horsepower spiked to 2,800. The plane surged forward like it had been kicked. It could hit 470 miles per hour in level flight and climb at nearly 4,000 feet per minute. It was designed for one purpose: chasing down jets and V-1 buzz bombs. By March 1945, P-47 pilots like Major George Bostwick of the 63rd Fighter Squadron were hunting jets for sport. Bostwick shot down 2 Me-262s in a single week. He discovered the jet's fatal flaw: it had to slow down. To land, to turn, or to line up a bombing run, the jet had to bleed speed. And the moment it did, the P-47 was waiting. Bostwick's report stripped away the mystique of the Nazi wonder weapon. The jets are fast, but they can't turn, and they can't take punishment. One burst from our battery, and they come apart like paper. The Germans had invented the technology of tomorrow, but they were being killed by the industrial brute force of today. While the P-47 was dismantling the Luftwaffe in Europe, it faced a completely different nightmare on the other side of the world: the Pacific. Here, the enemy wasn't altitude, it was distance. The Pacific theater was vast, hot, and unforgiving. A fighter plane needed to fly for hours just to find the enemy. The Japanese Zero was designed for this: light, long-ranged, and agile. The P-47, with its massive weight and fuel consumption, should have failed, but the 348th Fighter Group, operating out of New Guinea, decided to rewrite the manual. Their commander was Colonel Neil Kirby. He understood that against the fragile Japanese fighters, the Thunderbolt wasn't just a plane, it was a battering ram. On October the 11th, 1943, over WWII, Kirby didn't retreat. He led a fighter of just 4 P-47s against a Japanese formation of 40 aircraft, 12 bombers, and 28 fighter escorts. The odds were 10-1. Kirby used the P-47's kinetic energy. He dove through the formation, firing short, brutal bursts. He shot down one, then another, then another. He turned, climbed, and dove again. By the time the engagement ended, Kirby had shot down 6 enemy planes in a single mission. He set a Pacific theater record and earned the Medal of Honor. The Japanese pilots were terrified. They were used to fighting American P-40s or Wildcats, planes that broke if you hit them right. Saburo Sakai, the legendary Japanese ace, encountered the P-47s over New Guinea. His account reflects pure frustration. "We called them monsters. Our 20mm cannon, which could destroy a P-40 with a few hits, seemed to have no effect. I put dozens of rounds into one Thunderbolt and watched it fly away. Their return fire was terrifying. Streams of heavy bullets that tore aircraft apart." But Republic Aviation wasn't satisfied. The Army needed a fighter that could escort the massive B-29 superfortresses all the way to Japan. They needed a fighter with impossible range. So they built the P-47N. It was the final evolution of the dinosaur. They stretched the wings. They didn't just add tanks, they engineered wet wings. They sealed the internal structure of the wings themselves to hold fuel, 93 gallons in each wing, plus the main tanks, plus external drop tanks. The result was a single-engine fighter that could fly 2,350 miles. It weighed 20,000 pounds fully loaded. more than some twin-engine bombers. It required miles of runway to take off, but once it was in the air, it was unstoppable. It could fly from Saipan to Tokyo, fight for 30 minutes, and fly home. When the B-29s arrived over Japan to burn the cities, the Japanese pilots looked up, hoping to find unguarded bombers. Instead, they found the flying milk bottles waiting for them. The P-47 had conquered the distance. Now there was nowhere left to hide. By January 1st, 1945, the Luftwaffe was desperate. In a final suicide gamble known as Operation Bodenplatte, they launched 900 fighters in a surprise dawn attack. They wanted to destroy the American Air Force on the ground. At Airfield Y-34, near Metz, home of the 365th Fighter Group, the attack initially succeeded. German fighters strafed the flight line. 22 Thunderbolts burned in their revetments. A captured German pilot taunted the American commander, Major George Brooking. "We have destroyed your squadron." Brooking pointed to the horizon, where transport planes were already circling. "By tomorrow, I'll have 40 brand new ones. How long will it take you to replace your pilots?" The German's smirk vanished. He was right. With 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47 D-40s filled the flight line. The Luftwaffe lost 271 aircraft and 213 irreplaceable pilots that morning. They never recovered. The numbers tell the story of inevitable defeat. At Farmingdale, Long Island, and Evansville, Indiana, the assembly lines produced one Thunderbolt every hour. 15,683 P-47s were built. Each plane required 65,000 individual parts, 8 miles of wiring, 2,400 precision-machined engine components. They didn't just build them, they flooded them with fuel. The 9th Air Force alone consumed 25 million gallons of aviation fuel every month. It was the ultimate war of attrition. If the Germans killed a pilot, the Americans graduated 30,000 new ones. Each American had 400 hours of training before seeing combat. The average German pilot in 1945 had less than 30. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was an execution. In 1985, American and German pilots met at a reunion in Phoenix, Arizona. General Adolf Galland, the legendary head of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, was asked about the P-47. He admitted the fatal German mistake of 1943. "We saw this big, heavy fighter and we laughed," Galland said. "We said the Americans built a bomber and called it a fighter, but we were the ones who didn't understand." He revealed the name his men eventually gave the 8.5 caliber guns. They stopped calling them milk bottles. They called them Roosevelt's organ because of the terrifying music they played. "Once you heard that sound," Galland said, "you'll never forget it." Today, at the United States Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio, a restored P-47D sits in the hangar. The placard lists its speed, but the real story is in the small display case next to it. It holds a strip of gun camera film. It shows a Focke-Wulf 190 disintegrating under fire. Below it, a quote from an unnamed German prisoner in 1945. "We laughed when we first saw them. Fat, ugly things. We stopped laughing when we realized they didn't need to turn or climb. They just pointed those guns at you, and you ceased to exist." The P-47 Thunderbolt started the war as a joke. It ended the war as the most feared machine in the sky. German pilots laughed in April 1943. By May 1945, there were no German pilots left to laugh. The thunder had spoken, and the sky belonged to America. But those pilots didn't fly themselves. They were guided by men who understood that sometimes brute force is the only answer to tyranny. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, if you believe that the engineering marvels and the men who flew them shouldn't disappear into the silence of an archive, then do us a favor. Hit that subscribe button. We are digging through the dust of history every single week to find the machines that won the war. And if you're watching this right now, drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from, or simply leave the name of a veteran in your family who served. Let's fill the comment section with a memorial that no one can ignore. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping history alive.